Hello BookTube, it's Roz, and here am I doing a tag on Tag Sunday. Can that be right? The reason is because this is a new tag by Tilly of Tilly Shelf, my daughter, if you don't know otherwise, especially for Jane Austen July. And so I thought I would do it on a Sunday so that maybe the people I tag might get to do it for Tuesday if they want. Now then, Tilly has asked us to start by tagging people that we know are doing Jane Austen July. Now, I'm a bit of a Jane Austen July freak, so I know a lot of people who are doing Jane Austen July because I go around and look at Jane Austen July TBRs. So I'm going to give you a few. Alan of Big Hard Books and Classics, and Berna of Berna's Bookish Adventures, Christina of Knitting Books, etc., Kelly of Books I'm Not Reading, always does Jane Austen July, does Kelly, as does Hannah of Hannah's Books. Risha of For the Love of Classics, I only discovered her channel through because she got involved in the Jane Austen Task Mistress video, which is on Claudia, one of the Jane Austen July hosts, channel, and you must watch if you haven't already. Scott and Nell, I wouldn't think they would be Jane Austen July participants perhaps, but Scott has said he's going to reread Persuasion. Emily of Novell Novels, another Jane Austen July regular. Marilyn Mayer Mendoza. Now, like a couple of the others I mentioned, I don't think she had a channel last year, so this is her first Jane Austen July, but she's getting stuck into it and is, yes, made a lovely video already. Jim of Books Reading and Stuff, he says he's going to read Northanger Abbey as his token Jane Austen for Jane Austen July, so you're in, Jim. And, oh, that's probably everybody. Yeah. That will do, I think, anyway. So let's go for the prompts. Longish prompts, because what's nice is they've all got a little kind of quotation from a Jane Austen novel about homes, because this is the Jane Austen at home tag, and yeah, inspired by some of the different houses in Jane Austen's books. So, and the first one is from Mansfield Park, and it's about Mansfield Park. The grandeur of the house astonished, but could not console her. Ah. Name a grand book that may or may not have been difficult to read. Now then, this is definitely a grand book, but not at all difficult to read. It's Dangerous Liaisons, or Les Liaisons Dangereuses. It's a French book written by a contemporary of Jane Austen. He didn't die until 1803, I think. She was older than her, but you know, lived at the same time. Pierre-Ambroise François Chaudelot de la Clos. Not quite as ridiculously posh as his name sounds, but it's writing about a couple of dubiously, in terms of their morality, French aristocrats, the Marquise de Merteuil and the Vicomte de Valmont. And it's an excellent film of it. From some time back, this may be why you know, but basically they kind of intrigue to sort of seduce, well, for Valmont to seduce an innocent girl. It's all about the decadence of pre-revolutionary France, I guess. Came out in 1782, I think. Don't know if Jane Austen read it, might not have been considered suitable. Highly readable though, and definitely grand. Question number 2, Barton Cottage. That's the cottage in Sense and Sensibility where Eleanor and Marianne and have to go and live with their mother when they're sort of turfed out of what had been their home, Norland. So the quotation is, in comparison of Norland, it was poor and small indeed. Name a book about a household in difficult circumstances. Now, almost like the natural go-to for households in difficult circumstances is Dickens, isn't it? But I've resisted that one. But I think I've got classics a bit on the mind, so because of Jane Austen July. So a lot of my answers are kind of classic books. And this one I've gone for Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South, because again, this is a book where a young woman ends up moving to a sort of considerably less comfortable and attractive home because of something to do with her father. So Margaret Hale in this is the daughter of a sort of comfortably off country parson, who in the south of England, who decides that he's going to become a dissenter, and leave the church because his conscience tells him he must, and whisks Margaret and her mother up to a sort of industrial town in the north where he has to make a living as a tutor, and they're in significantly reduced circumstances. A bit like, Eleanor and Marianne, in that they're not poor, but they're definitely not in the comfort that they were used to. It's good book, North and South. Number 3 is Hartfield, which is of course the house in Emma. And the quote is, "I believe few married women are half as much mistress of their husband's house as I am of Hartfield," says Emma. Name a book that you feel entirely the mistress or master of. I struggled a bit with this because I think that the books that I feel most the mistress of are all Jane Austen books, and it felt like it was cheating to name any of them for this tag. So I have gone for Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles. And the reason I'd say I feel really mistress of this is because it was one that I studied for my English O-level. Those are the exams that you take when you're 16. When I was a young woman, they don't exist anymore. But you know that thing where you spend a lot of time with the book and really pick it apart and write a load of essays about it. Then it's kind of buried in your head and forever. But this is a book that also buried itself in my heart, I suppose. It was my first Thomas Hardy, and is the reason, I guess, why I love him, even though they're miserable, most of his books. So, next one. Oh, Fullerton. Now, there was nothing so charming to her imagination as the unpretending comfort of a well-connected parsonage, something like Fullerton. That's the heroine of Northanger Abbey. The question, Tilly's question for us is, name a book containing a contented family. Well, this was a struggle because I don't seem to read books about contented families. In fact, you don't get loads of contented families in books for adults. You do in children's books, and I can think of quite a few for that. The Moomin family, for example, in Tove Jansson's books, or the family in Swallows and Amazons. So many. The Borrowers, they're a happy family, aren't they? Little Women, I guess they're the kind of classic example of a loving family in a book that's sort of perhaps not somewhere between a children and adults book. It's certainly one that people read as an adult. But I thought that was kind of cheating a little. So I thought I must be able to think of an adult one. And I've come up with slightly unconventional answer, or an unconventionally happy family. And that is the one featured in Beryl Bainbridge's According to Queenie, because it is the rather strange family of a sorts that was established when Dr. Johnson, as in, Boswell's Life of Johnson or the Boswell's Dictionary, was kind of almost adopted as an adult, and after he'd been lost his wife, into the household of his patron, Henry Thrale, and his wife Hester Thrale, and he lived with them for basically, I mean, not 100%, but most of the time, for 17 years. So, an unconventional family of sorts that kind of worked. And their daughter Queenie was sort of his goddaughter. And if you haven't read this, I feel it's one of those underrated books that doesn't get talked about now, since Bainbridge died. But it's an excellent, excellent book. I warmly recommend that one. Well, now, where are we? Rosings Park. You know where Rosings Park is, don't you? It's where Catherine de Bourgh, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, lives in Pride and Prejudice. And this is, his name's gone out of my head. Elizabeth's cousin that she was going to marry and that Charlotte Lucas marries instead. It'll come back to me. Anyway, he's talking about it, Rosings. Okay. He declared he might almost have supposed himself in the small summer breakfast parlour at Rosings, a comparison that did not at first convey much gratification. Although he meant well. Name a book that other books are constantly being compared to. Now, I haven't got a book to wave here because I don't own a copy of this book, but, and this is like a little mini incy wincy baby rant, and that is that I'm sick and tired of books, any book by a youngish woman writer, especially if she's Irish, being compared to Sally Rooney's novels. You know, it's always the new Sally Rooney, you know, so like normal people or Conversation with Friends. Why? I mean, I enjoyed Normal People, but wasn't wild about it. But, you know, is there no other point of reference? Okay, rant over. Number 6. Now, this is a funny sort of house to describe, because it's HMS Sloop. HMS The Asp, Her Majesty's ship, The Asp. It was a sloop, which was Captain Wentworth in Persuasion. It was his first command, and so he lived on it. So hence it was sort of his home. And it's described as, in Persuasion, quite worn out and broken up. I was the last man who commanded her. Show us a book that is looking the worse for wear. Okay, only one possible candidate for this for me. I said I was going to avoid Jane Austen books as answers to this tag, but I'm afraid it has to be my my copy of Pride and Prejudice, which is yes, now barely readable, but I'm never going to be parted from it, that's for sure. Now, number 7, Northanger Abbey, obviously in the book Northanger Abbey. An abbey! Yes, it was delightful to be really in an abbey, but she doubted as she looked round the room whether anything within her observation would have given her the consciousness. Name a book that wasn't as creepy or dramatic as you thought it would be. Well, I don't read a lot of creepy books, I suppose, and when I do, they're always disappointingly not as creepy and dramatic as I thought they would be, because I don't think I don't really respond well to creepy, you know, and like, I don't feel it right, I suppose. But the one I've picked for this is Émile Zola's Thérèse Raquin, which is notorious for being a book about a murder and about like a cold-blooded, immorally planned, heartless and strange murder. And it is, and yet it still isn't as creepy as you think that it would be, or as I thought it would be from its reputation. Worth reading, but yeah. Now, Portsmouth. The house at Portsmouth, where Fanny from Mansfield Park, where her family live. Okay. The smallness of the house and thinness of the walls brought everything so close to her that, added to the fatigue of her journey and all her recent agitation, she hardly knew how to bear it. Name a book that disappointed you when you revisited it. So she's talking about going back and visiting her home after years away, because she's sort of adopted at Mansfield Park. Okay, there is only one possible answer to this for me, and it's the answer to this question every time I hear a version of this question, and that is The Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger, which I liked as a teenager, and when I reread it in my sort of 40s, I just thought, what? Now I know that will offend some people, so I'll who still love it even now. So I will move on swiftly from that one and say no more. Which is irritating when I reread it. Shh, don't say. Okay. Number 9 is Kellynch Hall. And this is the house where the Elliots live in Persuasion, and her father is he's a baronet, so he's reading in the baronetage So it was his favourite reading book about England's baronets. Okay, so Kellynch Hall, principal seat, Kellynch Hall in the county of Somerset. So he liked to read about his own house in this book. Yeah. Name a book from your ancestral home. Well, the book I've picked is the illustrated Origin of Species. Well, it doesn't have to be illustrated. This one just happens to be by Charles Darwin. No, I didn't grow up with Charles Darwin, but I'm going to count this as being from my ancestral home. I think Tilly means, you know, near where you grew up, basically, because he wrote it when he lived in Down House in the village of Down, which is like the next door village to where I grew up. It's just literally like a couple of miles away. So it is kind of from my home area. There you go. And finally, question number 10, Pemberley. You all know Pemberley's Mr. Darcy's house in Pride and Prejudice, don't you? Yeah, okay. They'd now entered a beautiful walk by the side of the water, and every step was bringing forward a nobler fall of ground. And Tilly's question is, name a book you're ready to dive into, because although it doesn't happen in the book, in the BBC drama, what happens at that point is that Colin Firth playing Mr. Darcy emerges from that body of water in dripping, clingy, semi-see-through white shirt. So now, it's a travesty, no, but that is definitely the best Pride and Prejudice adaptation. So, a book I'm ready to dive into. Well, I'm still in the middle of all sorts of lovely bits of Jane Austen July reading, but the book that I'm kind of anticipating diving into just a little bit further off is Sanctuary by William Faulkner, because when we get to the end of the one for Jane Austen July, it becomes Faulkner in August. That's the next treat, and I'm having such fun with the big group of people who are going to be doing the group read of Sanctuary that I'm really anticipating diving into it. Then Tilly ends with a bonus question. Which of these households would you most like to live in? So would you like to be in the grandeur of Rosings Park or Pemberley? I think not. A bit too much trouble, I think, looking after somewhere like that. In fact, but I would definitely wouldn't like to live on the Asp. Yes, I managed to ship the Asp. I think that Fullerton sounds nice, but if I was to live in Fullerton, I'd have to either be a vicar or be married to one, so that's out of the question. Northanger Abbey, too posh again. Hartfield, nice, but, you know, Emma's father's always talking about drafts, and I don't like a draft. So I think I'm going to go, and definitely not Mansfield Park, so I am going to go for Barton Cottage, and that's the little house where the family in Sense and Sensibility, you know, Eleanor and Marianne, went and lived, and it was small but comfortable and will be just right, I think, for me. It's got just the right number of rooms, and there's lovely walking to be had around it, so that would suit me down to the ground. Thank you, Tilly, for a splendid tag.